Welcome to Seen and Heard podcast, where everyone should be seen and heard. And welcome my co-hosts, Chrissy and Charles. Hello. Today's subject entitled, the topics will be, will Trump finally be held accountable? We'll talk about a GK Owens and the Second Amendment. And I want to open up with this video here. This is just a short clip from Jake Tapper for after today's proceedings.
Security laws and then obstructing and refusing to cooperate with the FBI.
Whatever this spectacle is that's unfolding before us, let's remember what this case is about. Let's remember what this indictment charges. Again, Donald Trump is charged with a series of federal felonies for mishandling the most sensitive government documents that we have and for obstruction of justice, along with Walt Nauta, who is charged with intentionally setting up lies to the grand jury, to the FBI. Any way you look at this, and again, despite whatever may be going on in that restaurant, this case isn't going to be settled legally in a cafe. It's going to be settled in the court based on the facts and law.
The folks in the control room, I don't need to see any more of that. He's trying to turn this in. He's trying to turn it into a spectacle, into a campaign ad. That's enough of that. We've seen it already. Let's go over again the 37 charges that Donald Trump is facing right now. We don't have to go into each one.
Sure.
But Ellie, if you could basically detail what are the allegations here? We have counts 1 to 31. Those have to do with specific.
So something happened today because Jake Tapper is usually kind of like, he doesn't usually push back or, too bad for the GOP or anything like that. Because he seems like he's a GOP himself, but something just really annoyed him to where he was kind of shook, like he was like pointing at the back, going, "Don't show any more of those videos." But yeah, so.
Well, he's trying to reclaim the damage done by the town hall because they were accused of giving him free ad time for his campaign. So now he's pretending like CNN is not about that. So it's kind of embarrassing for him.
Well, they got an uphill battle. They have an uphill battle because the Fox people that they're trying to court are not going to come to CNN. They're not going to do that. So, and Chrissy, what were your thoughts of Jake, how he was reacting? He was shook.
I mean, everybody's over, but at the same time, like, it's one of those things like, I don't want to hear it, but then I can't stop listening, And I mean,
dumpster fire.
And he just had enough, like, at that moment, he was at capacity for that moment. And, like, a lot of people turn this into, in a sense, I'm not going to say glorifying Trump, but like, it's just giving him too much attention. Like, the facts are he's been indicted. Like he said, let's talk about the counts. We don't need to talk about all the other backstory. We don't need to talk about, well, even if he is convicted, we don't need to talk about all that. Talk about what he's being charged with. We're going to follow the story based on the counts that he's charged with, how serious these are, and keep it at factual, like, yeah.
I have a feeling we're going to end up in another, like, 2015, when they started in 2015 and they were filming the empty podiums and his plane, empty plane on the tarmac. And because then also they were saying that if he gets convicted and he's in prison, he could still run, be voted on, and be the commander-in-chief in prison. Like, because the United States does not have any laws against that. Like
Right.
I can't grapple with this.
Well, it's common. There's very few countries that are going to spell out and say someone sitting in prison cannot hold office. You have to go out of your way to specify that kind of a law, and almost nobody is going to sit there and say, yeah, so that's what happened in Brazil. They had to figure out, can Lula run for president if he's in prison?
But see, the thing with that is, I get it. However, if he goes to prison on federal charges based on what he did when he was president, or ending his presidency by taking classified documents, and what people are saying that there's possibly evidence of him sharing this information outside, or things of him saying about shit, like, so why would you put him into that position, or why would he be allowed to hold that position again if he's in jail for doing something when he had that position or was ending that?
Well,
that don't make sense.
Because Eugene V. Debs, the socialist candidate for president in four election cycles, he was in prison for opposing our entrance into World War I. I would have voted for him, and I would have been glad if he won and was elected to become president while he was sitting in prison.
But
and that would have been and he would have been in there for being a traitor to the United States.
But it's not the same as, well.
Yeah,
okay. Explain why.
I see the difference, huh?
But why? Okay,
it's a huge difference.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a huge difference.
So, like, I mean,
but it's the same principle, It just because you're a political enemy, you shouldn't. Yeah,
but
no, it is. I mean, just because you're seen as a political enemy of the United States,
the thing is,
shouldn't prevent you from becoming president.
No, it's different. Was this guy president before and then he whatever? No. If you were president before, he held that position. That's how come that's the orange man. That's how come he had access to the classified documents, because he held the position. That's where the difference is. He actually held the position. He had access to the documents based on being in that position. His position was ending, even though he didn't believe he lost. Outside of the facts, his position ended. And instead of doing what you're supposed to do and turn them over to the archives, he kept them. And then on top of it, lied about it, tried to hide them all over the place, make people hide them. And there's supposedly facts or evidence of him sharing information or getting ready to, whatever the story is, because I haven't seen it. But so you held the position already, and the crimes that you were being charged and going to jail for is based on that position. Why? That's like, the same, what always happens when somebody steals and you let them out, and if you don't ban them from the store, they're going to go in the store and steal again. Like that, you know what I mean? Like, that's the same thing. He's going to, if he gets back into that power, he's going to do the same thing again. Or you know what he might do different?
Yeah, but his supporters like that. That's what they like about him.
Yeah, I know, because they're all deranged. They're all,
but regardless of how loud they are, they're still the minority.
No, being deranged is not.
No, but what I'm saying is, my point is, I get exactly what you're saying. My point though is, if you are,
no, I get your point. He did specific crimes against the presidency, like Nixon, for example. Nixon did specific crimes as president, right? It's not like he committed a felony that had something to do with civilian life. No, he committed a crime against the office of the presidency, he misused his power as a president. It's not just some random felony. I get it. But again, his constituency likes that. And if you're going to define that specifically, then again, like, for example, let's say we elected Edward Snowden as president, and he went and just leaked all the files. I'd reelect him. But at that point, he would definitely go down for federal crimes. He would definitely be in a situation where he abused his power in office. But I would agree with him. I'd like to see the JFK files. I'd like to see the UFO files. I'd like to see him, the Castro files. I'd like to see the collusion with the mafia. I'd like to see the CIA crack trade. I'd like to see Snowden leak all those documents.
So,
but he would for sure spend 100 years in prison for doing it.
Okay, but then he could still be.
And then I'd reelect him.
Then he would be president. He would be president and pardon himself. So no, he won't. But okay, just because you want to see it, do you deserve?
You're right. If he became president, you're right. He might pardon himself, I guess, or however. Yeah, but that would be amazing.
That's what Trump's going to do.
But do you see why we can't?
No, I don't.
Why it would be problematic if
no.
In other words, we could.
No, I mean, like when think about people that are in jail when they come out. Not all of them, depending on their crime. If they had firearms before, they can't get firearms now. Why? Because of whatever their crime was or the charge was.
I know, Chrissy. I just said, let's say Edward Snowden in his first term leaks all the secret documents, and then he's going to get convicted. He's, abuse of power, blah, blah, blah. Does that mean that therefore now he can't serve a second term?
Yes,
I'd say
exactly.
he should.
Because he's going to do it again.
And I want him to do it again. I'd want him to leak even more documents.
All right, so why don't we just give every country all the freaking documents, give all the mobsters all the documents that they need? Why don't we give everybody everything that's whatever, so that we could cause chaos and confusion and have nothing but bloodshed? What's the point? What's the point then? What is the point? What's the point of having a president and having a government if we're going to shell out all the information, all the classified and sensitive information to everybody?
Chrissy, it's called the Freedom of Information Act, okay? And any person, not just United States citizen, anybody in the world can sue for documents. And now they get to redact them.
Classified documents, though, not for classified.
No, you can ask for anything. They redact it.
Yeah, and what's going to be redacted? All the personal information, all of this. So what's the point?
You don't know that.
Yes, that's what I work in the courts. I work in the courts, so I know what has to be redacted. There's certain things that have to be redacted based on HIPAA and based on PII and PHI and all this other stuff.
I know, but here's the thing: it's very
get a piece of paper that has 50 million blacked out things that has a blank went to the blank.
Okay, blank, Chrissy, let me give you an example. Yeah, exactly. So, for example, there was a FOIA request for the secret meeting that happened between Dick Cheney and the CEOs of the 6 oil companies just before the Iraq invasion. And when they released them, they literally redacted 100% of the words. I mentioned this in our other podcast. But what was interesting is they didn't redact the maps. Well, what were the maps? They were the map of Iraq oil fields. So in other words, we know that he had a secret meeting where the CEOs of these oil companies said, here's Iraq's oil fields. We want them, go invade. Now, they redacted all the verbiage, but we still got information. Secondly, depending on who redacts the documents, what we've been able to do is multiple groups will request the same documents, and every single time they're redacted slightly differently. And so as a result, when we piece together the multiple redacted versions, we go from having, say, 70% of the document to having 90% of the document.
You know, at the end of the day, I don't care. Go do whatever. I'm moving. I'm dual citizenship. I got dual citizenship, so I don't need to be in America. I'm not telling nobody where I'm going. Sharon knows, but Sharon isn't telling them either.
So my thing about
that's why I'm not an American. I'm a New Yorker.
So my question is, it's like, okay, so felons that come out of prison, they have felonies. They are not allowed to vote. But yet, all of the
Sharon. No, it depends on the state.
Okay, not all of them. Okay,
but too many people think they can't vote because they're a felon. It depends on the state.
Okay, depending on the state. So to finish the question, that they're not allowed that right. But with all the crimes that we but
that's a result of Jim Crow. That's a Jim Crow thing to have.
But with all the crimes that we do,
it's not something I disagree that ex-felons should lose.
I also disagree, but
I think it's Jim Crow thing. But let's not even talk about it.
Let me finish because it's a continuation. But with that said, with all the crimes that we know that Trump has done, he's still allowed to the crimes that he's committed are worse than the Rosenbergs. The Rosenbergs committed espionage, and they were what were they electrocuted? They were electrocuted, or was it firing squad? They were in the 1954. The Rosenbergs. They were spies.
Rosenberg, yeah.
Rosenberg. So Trump has committed worse crimes than the Rosenbergs, and they were executed by the state.
Okay. So, like I said, I don't want to see someone do something on the left side of the spectrum and have him exclude. Like I said, if you go in there, Bernie Sanders goes in there, releases a bunch of documents detailing redlining in banks, detailing redlining in the housing and urban development. I mean, there's a lot of nasty documents that we have a lot of them. But if he were to release even more about conducting medical experiments on entire cities, let's talk about this stuff. If he were to release those documents and then afterwards people are like, hey, we don't like that, we can't run again, I don't want to set that precedent.
Okay, for argument's sake, that I agree with. Those kind of documents.
Let's say a president goes and gets arrested in a protest.
Not national security, though.
Excuse me. National security has always been an excuse for empire, war, and war crimes. National security, that discourse basically allows you to circumvent every kind of civil right. It's national security. We had to lock them up in Guantanamo Bay.
When there are people's lives at stake, though, you can't. That's not up for debate, though.
That's always what they say. We invaded Iraq because lives were at stake, and it was a whole big lie. That was for national security interests.
There are people that are undercover.
Write down every single time the government says national security interests, just 1-to-1, and then see what they did, who they invaded, who they killed, and see who was protected. There's no relationship.
I'm not advocating for what they do. I'm not advocating for that. But I'm just saying there are people that are still undercover in different parts of the world that have nothing to. They don't even know what's going on over here, and they think they're being protected. But then when their cover is blown, then they get killed because someone that mishandled intelligence.
I understand that. That's what happened with Victoria Plame. I don't know if you've seen that movie with Sean Penn and Naomi Watts. Naomi Watts plays Victoria Plame, and that's exactly what the Bush administration did to her. They blew her cover. Why he didn't go to prison for that? It's just, again, we're just in an era of it's just
utter chaos.
1984.
It's just utter chaos. Yeah, it's just. Let me play this video real quick for context. So hold on, we'll get thoughts on the other side of this video. Let's see here.
Well, take a look at this. Former President Donald Trump said if he is convicted in this most recent case, or any of the charges he's facing, he's going to stay in to run for president. And I don't know if you knew this or not, but even if he is convicted, he is allowed to stay in the race. He is actually allowed to be president of the United States. So if he won and he was in prison, he could actually be president of the United States while in prison. But then he could possibly pardon himself. There's a lot to unravel here. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I quit my job in the mainstream media about 2 months ago to give you the truth. Follow me. Hit the plus symbol right over there. My name is Dave Bondi. Keeping it real.
I just don't understand. I don't get it.
Well, take a look at this. Former President Donald Trump said if he...
All right. Well, I've already gave you my view on that. I think you have to allow that.
So why can't everybody who's in jail just get pardoned? Everybody should be able to.
I agree. I think we should abolish prisons too.
Yeah, we should. Just let everybody who killed somebody just go on a rampage and continue killing somebody, shooting people, stealing cars, stabbing people. Just go ahead. Do what the hell
That's what I say. Why stop at stop signs anymore?
Yeah, exactly.
At this point, why stop at stop signs? Why stop at traffic lights? Why?
Exactly. I've been wanting to hit people that cross the street that get on my nerves. Let me just start hitting people. Let me just start hitting people. I'm just drive right through them. I'm a railroad right through them.
Ridiculous era. I mean, seriously, at this point, and especially seeing the display today of him barely getting a slap on the wrist for what he did, I'm just like, yeah, okay, we just not follow any rules anymore. No rules. No rules for anybody. None.
We could get rid of the court system. I don't need to work in the court no more. We don't need judges. We don't need none of that. Let's just get rid of the entire thing. Yep. Let everybody govern.
It's not fair anyway.
Let everybody govern themselves. Let everybody dictate and make up their own rules. Like the sovereign people, they got their own whatever. Let me have my own. I can make up my own rules.
I mean, we're in a real life live action idiocracy.
Yes.
We're in a live action idiocracy. I mean, seriously, if I get pulled over for rolling through a stop sign from the cops, I'm just going to be like, well, Trump got away with espionage. Why am I getting a ticket?
Yeah.
No more rules. That's
exactly. Do away with everything.
We're just no more rules.
But still pay me though. Since we don't need the court system no more, but that is my current job. I'm not gonna work, and you're gonna still pay me for being a court employee, a government employee, even though I'm not working there no more because we don't need it. But I'm still gonna get paid by the state. That works for me. I go travel. Not a problem.
And on that note, we're going to segue into the stand your ground and the Second Amendment because there is the video that Charles sent me. It was basically talking about white supremacy and the Second Amendment. So the Second Amendment basically, like what I've argued that actually before, we've had a conversation about that before, Chrissy, where I don't believe the Second Amendment is for, Black people. No, regardless of what people say, yes, on paper, and they want to argue, oh, the Second Amendment is for everybody. Realistically, it is not, because I've seen too many social experiment videos where there'll be a Black guy and a white guy. They'll be in like the same town. And it is just like the Black guy goes first. Let's say the Black guy goes first. He has like some kind of rifle on the back of his shoulder. Same kind of rifle the white guy has. Both of those people both have licenses. They're both legally allowed to have those weapons that they have strapped to their backs, and they're in a state that allows open and carry. So the reactions that the Black guy received for carrying his rightful Second Amendment gun were totally different than his friend, which happened to be white. Like, it was just immediate. And I don't care what anybody says. Yes, if you need protection, if you feel that you need to take protection, everybody has a right to that. But there's this culture, there's this ideology, this mentality of weapons that I did not personally grow up with. I didn't grow up around people like, that had that kind of mentality. So personally, for me, speaking for myself, I don't like being around those kind of people that like guns and like that gun culture. Now, I used to respect people that just would hunt. If you ate what you hunted, okay, I could respect that. But the current gun culture in this country has morphed into terrorists. It's terrorism or terroristic, and they don't treat Black people with the 2A the same as white people. They just don't. So I'm going to play some of this video that Charles sent me earlier. It's white supremacy and the Second Amendment, and then we're going to talk about that, and then we're going to talk about what happened in Florida with which is a prime example of the Second Amendment and stand your ground with a key let's see, pronounce her name right. Ajike Owens. Okay, so let me flip this around here. Ajike. Thank you, Charles. Ajike.
Out on the street today, civilians should be carrying a loaded weapon.
On May 2nd, 1967, 24 men and 6 women marched into the California State Capitol building in Sacramento. They were carrying pistols, shotguns, and rifles. But this was not a SWAT team or a security force, at least not a government one. In fact, this heavily armed group was more of a well-regulated militia. And they'd come to the Capitol that day to try to stop the legislature and the state's Republican governor from passing a law that would strip them of their ability to openly carry their weapons as they patrolled the streets of their neighborhoods in an effort to keep people safe.
They put trumped up charges of conspiracy and felonies on everyone who went in to exercise a constitutional right and said they had no right to bear arms in a public place. The California Penal Code section 12020 through 12027 and also the Second Amendment of the Constitution guarantees the citizen a right to bear arms on public property.
Now, it may come as a surprise to some of you, given today's discourse on guns, that the National Rifle Association and the Republican governor of California, Ronald Reagan, came out passionately in an effort to strip this militia's right to carry arms.
But I would think that some of the bills that have been suggested, such as not carrying a loaded weapon on a city street or in town, this might certainly be a good one.
Why was Ronald Reagan so up in arms? After all, California was an open carry state. These Americans were exercising their God-given Second Amendment rights. So what was the problem?
Am I under arrest? Take your hands off me if I'm not under arrest.
That militia that marched into the Capitol that day was the Black Panther Party. And the street patrols that they were engaged in were operations to protect their communities from the police and other government forces that had been targeting, abusing, and killing black people.
The Black Panther Party for self-defense calls upon the American people in general and the black people in particular to take full note of the racist California legislature, which is now considering legislation aimed at keeping the black people disarmed and powerless at the very same time that racist police agencies throughout the country are intensifying the terror, brutality, murder, and repression of black people.
California lawmakers were terrified. Some reportedly hid under their desks. The entire establishment, including the gun lobby, denounced these armed black people. And the bill, which became known as the Panther Bill, was aimed at taking away what the NRA and the Republicans portrayed as their sacred rights as Americans. In fact, the Panthers in the Capitol that day were charged with felonies.
FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover today asserted that the Black Panthers represent the greatest internal threat to the nation. Hoover said the Panthers have perpetrated numerous assaults on police and have engaged in violent confrontations throughout the country.
The so-called Panther Bill made one thing abundantly clear. Having armed black revolutionaries patrolling their neighborhoods with weapons was a greater threat than losing the right to openly carry weapons for everyone in California. In fact, this bill resulted in some of the strictest gun control laws anywhere in the United States, all because some black Americans exercised their right to carry loaded weapons. Now, around that same time, major media outlets were aghast as Malcolm X called on black people to arm themselves and to defend themselves against racist violence.
In areas where the police, whether it be federal, state, or city, have proven their inability or their unwillingness to defend Negroes, the lives and the property of Negroes, then it's only intelligent and it's only right that Negroes protect themselves, and I have encouraged them to buy a rifle and a shotgun, which according to the Constitution is legal.
For what purpose?
So that at any time, anyone makes any effort whatsoever to brutalize them or attack them or endanger them, they should have something to defend themselves.
The history of this reaction by white media to black gun ownership is a very telling one, because it reveals that the sanctity of the Second Amendment for all Americans is a myth. It's a myth today, and it's been a myth from the beginning. The real history of gun laws in the United States is not about hunting, and it's not about fighting tyranny. For the most part, if we're really being honest, it's been about white people having the right to bear arms and use them against black people, indigenous people, and other not real Americans. Just to put this in perspective, more than 80% of gun owners in the United States today are white, and the majority of those are men. And it's no coincidence that gun sales skyrocketed during the administration of the first black president of the United States.
You might have met our fresh-faced flower child president and his weak-kneed Ivy League friends, but you haven't met America. You haven't met the heartland, where the people will defend this nation with their bloody, calloused, bare hands. That's what it takes.
Here's the thing. The Second Amendment is not in danger, and it wasn't in danger during Obama's time in office. In the so-called debate around guns in the United States, the Second Amendment is treated as sacrosanct by both Democrats and Republicans. Yes, there are wide differences in opinion. Some Democrats want all assault weapons banned. Others say that the Second Amendment is really about hunting or sport or just for the defense of your home. But almost all major party politicians support keeping the Second Amendment on the books.
First of all, I support the Second Amendment. I lived in Arkansas for 18 wonderful years. I represented upstate New York. I understand and respect the tradition of gun ownership. It goes back to the founding of our country.
The Washington consensus is that the Second Amendment is set in stone, and we just need to tweak various laws and regulations, make sure that the bad guys don't get guns or that certain guns shouldn't be gettable. But that's all that's really being debated. Here's Obama after being confronted by a gun enthusiast at a town hall meeting at the end of his presidency.
There have been more guns sold since I've been president than just about any time in U.S. history, and at no point have I ever proposed confiscating guns from responsible gun owners.
Back in the 1990s, the conservative Supreme Court Chief Justice Warren Burger broke with orthodoxy on this issue, and he said that the modern interpretation of the Second Amendment was a dangerous joke.
If I were writing the Bill of Rights now, there wouldn't be any such thing as the Second Amendment. This has been the subject of one of the greatest pieces of fraud, I repeat the word fraud, on the American public by special interest groups that I have ever seen in my lifetime.
What's the actual history, the historical context behind the Second Amendment? That's a question we rarely hear discussed in our society. And the NRA, it's basically just one massive dog whistle about white people protecting themselves from dangerous non-white people, and more recently from Antifa and protesters and opponents of Donald Trump. And, well, let's actually hear it from Dana Loesch of the NRA herself.
They use their media to assassinate real news. They use their schools to teach children that their president is another Hitler. They use their movie stars and singers and comedy shows and award shows to repeat their narrative over and over again. And then they use their ex-president to endorse the resistance, all to make them march, make them protest, make them scream racism and sexism and xenophobia and homophobia, to smash windows, burn cars, shut down interstates and airports, bully and terrorize the law-abiding, until the only option left is for the police to do their jobs and stop the madness.
That message from the NRA is a direct descendant of the same mentality that has been a staple of white supremacy throughout the history of the United States. The real Americans need weapons to protect themselves from the savages. Gun rights in this country were forged on the idea that white people had the right to take native people's land by the barrel of the gun. They were forged on the idea that black people were living pieces of property that needed to be kept in place by armed slave patrols, militias, and posse justice. No matter what your position on guns is, the Second Amendment stems from an ideology that is rooted in the belief that white people have the right to control others with their weapons. As historian Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz put it, the Constitution is the sacred text of the civic religion that is U.S. nationalism. And that nationalism is inexorably tied to white supremacy.
One of the main reasons why I want to get out of this heathen country is the Second Amendment. This is not a civilized country. This is just, I'm speaking for myself. I'm not speaking for anybody else, but I hate it here. I hate the Second Amendment, and I hate the gun culture mentality. But besides that, what were your thoughts on the?
Go ahead, Chrissy, if you want to go.
I mean, I agree with what you say. I mean, it's not. It's the Second Amendment. Yes, all persons can bear arms, or whoever can bear arms, but it really isn't for the black person, because think about it. You had an active duty, like military black man driving in his car and got pulled over by the cops, and he's trying to explain himself, and he's in uniform, just getting off, leaving base in uniform, and they still pull him over and treat him like he's a standard civilian. This man gives his life for our country, and they like, put your hands out the window. So, like, imagine if he stepped out and he got his piece on it. Like, no, it escalated so quickly in that simple video. You know what I mean? And I mean, they say that just because they can't discriminate, they can't segregate. The segregation is no longer, so they can't say. So yes, they allow black people, but as soon as a black person has a gun, the first thing is, he had a gun, or even if the assumption, I thought he had a gun. Then you have a lot of these states with stand your ground, and now that gets used for everything, and they get away with it. I thought this little teenager he was coming after me, and then the kid went for a bag of Skittles in the Arizona, Trayvon Martin, but stand your ground worked for Zimmerman, who shot and killed him. So, I mean, but what's the difference? That was a black kid.
Stand your ground is basically code word for kill non-white people, and you'll get away with it, basically. It's like they back in the day, they used to carry those license cards, Negro hunting cards, where they had an actual license to hunt Negroes in this country.
Are you talking about the slave patrols?
Well, that, and then after that, they actually had little licenses where they could, the Klan had these little paper licenses in their wallets that they could hunt Negroes, and it's a Negro hunting license or something like that. Yeah. So basically, stand your ground is code for kill non-white people, and you'll get the law will protect you for doing that. And Philando Castile, he was another lawful black gun owner. He went to reach for his license and ID, and they shot and killed him in front of his kids and his it was his wife, girlfriend, or and his child. But a black man that had a legal right, supposed legal right to carry a gun, and he had a license, and they killed him. That's what this country stands for. That's what the Second Amendment stands for. Point blank. Period. It's no excuses,
Yeah.
no
So
nothing.
one thing that Howard Zinn points out in his book, People's History of the United States, is he goes back to the earliest periods of, well before the Constitution. And he basically talks about how there were militias, the reason why you have the militia thing in the Second Amendment is because the militias in America were, 50 to 100 years older than the United States itself, right? But again, there's this myth that the militias were somehow there to protect against England. They were literally a part of England. There's this myth that these militiamen were there, fighting this war, and you can look at the analysis. This myth, this popular U.S. myth about the effectiveness of the militiaman, the Minuteman, and the militia units is a huge myth. If you look at the actual analysis, the militia were always the weak points in the line. In fact, historically, the militia were frankly notorious for breaking and running. They weren't holding a solid line. So they were actually the weak point in the US military. But again, part of what Berger is talking about is this wild myth. Part of it is, for example, this idea of the wild, wild west and these cowboys walking around with their 6-shooters. All of those Western towns had gun bans. You were not allowed to bring your firearm into town. You were supposed to leave them outside of town. The most famous incident of all that entire period was the shootout at the OK Corral with Wyatt Earp. Well, what was he doing? He was confiscating the guns from those guys because they refused to give them up. So he grabbed Doc Holliday and a couple other guys, went down there as a posse and said, guys, you know the law. I'm here to carry out the law. You need to give up your firearms. They said no. A shootout ensued, and they all ended up dead. Again, this myth building. Furthermore, to complexify the issue, as he pointed out, this entire notion of restricting guns purely comes out of California, but not liberal California, from conservative California, because the Black Panthers literally walked in there with shotguns on their hips. And it's funny, David Hilliard, he's one of the co-founders, one of the 3 co-founders. He talks about how 2 of those shotguns weren't even working. Like it was a show. They put on a show, okay? And the way they made money, believe it or not, was they went to Chinatown in San Francisco and they buy little red Mao books, Mao's Little Red Book, famous Little Red Book, and buy them for I think $0.25 or $0.10 a piece, and then sold them to Berkeley students for $1. And that's how they raised the money for their first 2 shotguns. So anyway, so just to talk about that, so to complexify the issue, let's remind that veterans coming back from World War I returned to a very racist Jim Crow South. Now, we like to think of racism as being so much worse this period, that period. In fact, the worst period that's now labeled as the nadir of race relations. Nadir is the opposite of zenith. So zenith is the high point, nadir is the low point. So the low point of race relations was this period from 1920 to 1950s, right? So that was the Jim Crow era. 99% of all the Confederate statues were built during that period. The majority of lynchings happened in that period. That was the heyday of the KKK. So the second generation of KKK, if you will, right?
Thanks to the Daughters of the Confederacy.
Right, all that stuff, right? So we like to think of that ugly period being, post-Reconstruction. It was far worse later. Okay. So during that period, when these veterans came home, they found themselves under a full assault, and they used their firearms to protect themselves from the KKK, which is a white supremacist terrorist organization. And then, of course, we know the Black Panthers were protecting their neighborhoods from racist police and et cetera. So again, it's not that simple of an issue. That I do believe in the right of self-defense. And I also believe in the right of revolution. So, but the true story is that, like you guys were pointing out, there is very obviously a double standard. I mean, the most virulent white supremacist would also not dispute the fact that, of course, there's going to be a double standard, like you pointed out, with the white hunter and the black hunter walking down the street. Of course, they're going to be treated differently. That goes without. There's no doubt.
And the thing is the idea of being not just gaslit, but basically lied to your face, and so your intelligence is insulted, especially when you're actually seeing it happen. It's like you're right here. Here's the black guy. Here's the white guy. They both have identical guns. They both have legal license. They both adhere to the Second Amendment. Yet,
right. So the documentary filmmaker Michael Michael Moore,
yeah,
right?
Mm-hmm.
So in his Bowling for Columbine, he does the whole gun investigation, and he points out the fact that the NRA was started as the exact same year as the KKK.
Mm-hmm.
So he's pointing out what Jeremy Scahill started to scratch the surface, and what I was mentioning with Howard Zinn's book, History of the People's History of the United States, is that these militia were, they parade in public, and it was all about, keeping black people down, preventing an armed rebellion. Let's not forget the Haitian Revolution and what a huge shock that was. I mean, think about it. The Haitian Revolution defeated Napoleon. Okay, Napoleon could not be defeated by every single European country combined. Couldn't defeat this guy. Okay, I don't know if you just a little point in history. The only way they finally defeated Napoleon was to not fight Napoleon. The way they defeated him was to fight his other generals, and anywhere he was, they would just clear the fuck out. Okay, this guy was unstoppable. Okay, and yet the Haitian Revolution happened under Napoleon. So it's important to point out that this was a huge shock, and the U.S. made Haiti pay for it. They invaded
France.
And occupied Haiti 3 times. Yeah, they paid reparations right up, and they didn't finish paying reparations to France until the 1990s. They paid for centuries, or a century and a half,
and that was like punishment. That was like an extortion, right? It was punishment.
Well, they were paying reparations for their lost property, which were slaves. And so it's important to realize that the United States and the militias and all that was to prevent that kind of thing. Let's not forget the John Brown incident. The greatest white American to ever live is John Brown. And we're talking about this period called Bleeding Kansas that we learned about in the 1850s, where it was up for grabs whether Kansas was going to be a slave or free state. And a bunch of white people moved in there, and they just went to war with each other over it. There were white abolitionists who were absolutely dead set on liberating Africans by any means necessary. And that included taking over Harper's Ferry, which was a military arsenal. And I want to point out that the person who successfully raided the period they called the Raid of Harper's Ferry was General Robert E. Lee. At the time, he was a major or something like that.
Your audio, I think your audio went out. Okay, I can hear. Okay. Okay. Well, I'm going to share this article. So this is why they're also loosening up gun law, or there basically there are no gun laws because it's like a free for all now. So the United States is just an open shooting gallery, and so the reason they're loosening up these gun laws is because they are basically giving the message to these white people that you stand your ground and shoot non-white people. That's basically where we are in 2023 because we don't have a Supreme Court or DOJ that's going to stop them. So all these little red state tyrants, authoritarians, are riling up their white supporters to just shoot non-white people at will. So here's an example here. Um, White woman who fatally shot black neighbor made racist threats. White Florida woman charged with shooting and killing her black neighbor told detectives that she called the victim's children by racist slurs in the months leading up to the slaying, according to an arrest report. So they're being allowed to demean, uh, to treat non-white people any kind of way they want, and they have the backing of the state. The state is going to support them because what Florida is little Germany with Nazi uh, DeSantis, DeSatan, and so Susan Louise felt empowered. Susan Louise Lawrence, 58, admitted to the detectives that she called the children the N word. One child told deputies that the night of the shooting, Lawrence came out of her house and gave the children the middle finger and also said this: "Get away from my house, you black slave." The report from Marion County Sheriff's Office came out shortly before Lawrence made her initial appearance in court Thursday by video. And that took, a protest to get her in jail because she should have been arrested right away, but I think it was like a week later. She has been charged with first degree felony manslaughter with a firearm, as well as culpable negligence, battery, and 2 counts of assault, Sheriff Billy Wood said in a statement. So um, it's just, kind of disgusting. The country is raggedy.
Yeah, so I want to clarify the frame and the perspective here, okay?
Mhm.
Is that the reason why we have such a divide in this country is, though it may not be spelled out, the history I was just referring to before, from well before the foundation of this country, okay? This notion of firearms to kill off the native population and to keep the black population under control is deep down, they understand what this is about. The proof of that is in every single one of these incidents, like this one that just happened. We know about the little boy that was shot in the face by that old man. This is just this common occurrence. And the Trayvon Martin, let's not forget, who was the 12-year-old boy that was gunned down? Was that in Missouri that that started off the BLM thing? He was 12 years old, and the cop was like, yeah, maybe he was 12 years old, but he was 6 feet tall. And it was like this fear of black bodies, right? That white people empathize with this woman, like, oh yeah, she must have been scared. That black lady was banging on her door because this white lady had been terrorizing the kids in the neighborhood, and all the neighbors were like, yeah, she was always getting into conflicts. And she said stuff like, this is not the Underground Railroad slave. And she said things like, just made a lot of really racist comments towards the lady's kids already. So, we know that she's a virulent, bitter racist. But to white people, this is the proper use of guns, and it's consistent with all of their ancestors for centuries. In fact, not just for centuries, since the beginning. So I think the confusion that the MAGA Republican types and the conservatives is, why is this a problem now? We used to get medals for this shit. I could have gotten the mayorship of my little podunk town for having done this. You know, in the past, our previous generations, we would have thrown a fucking party for this lady, and we might have that night gone into a white rage and burned the entire black part of the town down. What is the problem here? They're very confused about what the outrage is all about. It's very novel to them. So that's why they're reacting. They don't know how to articulate that frustration and confusion. But they're like, this is what guns have always been for in this country. You know, this is the most American thing. This is what we did. Hey, sorry she got caught up, but hey, you know, she shouldn't have had all these kids. She shouldn't have been a single mother. She shouldn't have let them on her yard. Blah, blah, you know. And then now, I'll bet you by tomorrow, they'll be like, oh, turns out that mom, she had a criminal record. I mean, you see, that's where this comes from. To us, it seems so savage and barbaric and cruel. But it's not that, if that's the glory of your family's ancestry. The pride with which they wore their medals. The extermination of entire populations, right? The kidnapping of entire populations to build your wealth and your prominence and your dominance. Why would you turn your back on that? They know what they benefited from. They know how this system helps them. Why on earth would they give that up? So that's what I think is the fundamental disconnect with how the two sides of this diverge in this in these kinds of debates, is that this seems like the most perfectly appropriate reason for why they want the Second Amendment. These people do not want the Second Amendment for hunting. Okay? This is what they want. And let me give you the other piece of evidence. So, firstly, the evidence is what I pointed out with these incidents that we're talking about, with the shooting of people showing up to your front door. The other, and I want you to really look in this. During BLM, sure, in places like LA, New York, it was very popular. You know, it went on for days and days and days. In LA here, it went on for like a month straight. I mean, they were just spontaneous marches every single day for days on end. Okay. Now, in smaller towns, you had a few, you know, progressives and, you know, liberals and well-meaning white people who were like, let's have our support protest for BLM. These people showed up in bulletproof vests and AR-15s and intimidated. I mean, that by definition is terrorism. By every possible conceivable notion of terrorism, that is using weapons to intimidate political opponents, okay? And they got away with it. In every single, in thousands of towns where they got away with this. You go to YouTube and just put in BLM counter protest or whatever. These guys showed up on their own channels. Okay, I'll just give you one. This guy, Redneck Renegade, right? He does like bushcrafting videos and stuff like that. But during BLM, he and his buddies uploaded videos showing him in all their tactical gear and their ARs and their beer bellies, and intimidated these people to prevent them from protesting. And they said, oh, they're going to come here burning and looting.
All that is projection. Every time they say that is projection, because they're the ones that actually started the fighting, the looting, and the
looting was all over the world, right? And it's projection. And I'm not saying just in this case it's projection. If you look at, this is what I've been claiming all along, Sharon, is when you look at what conservatives say, they're so pathological. It's not just projection here and there. It's always projection.
Yep. And
because I cite it as a fundamental characteristic of that mindset.
And an admission, actually, because if you really listen to them, and
that's what a projection is,
and they are like, it's just insane. And then, but what doesn't help, the fact that the minority voices are able to be as loud as they are is because they have megaphones of everything. It's like, remember when the New York Times was like always going to these little diners to talk to all these people? It's like, wait a minute, don't you should get the other side's, perspective as far as how are they feeling. They were always doing these op-eds and think pieces about how the Midwest diner type were feeling, but look, 80% of the other people, we're waiting on somebody to come talk to us because we're not feeling good about a lot of things either. But yeah, so they're helping these minority
Yeah,
voices.
it's because of the fact that the people in the mainstream media are themselves products of the metropolitan areas. So for them to cover one another looks inbred. So they're saying, hey, we side with you, common man. So we're gonna go out to some podunk place in middle America. But yeah, I agree.
It's just nauseating. It's like today's coverage was just insane. It was like the I'm not shocked. I haven't been shocked in a while. It's now just too. I have utter contempt for these newsrooms. Like even NPR. I thought like I listened a little bit of NPR, but NPR is ODing on the Kool-Aid. It's like
Well, out
we're
here in LA, we call NPR National Petroleum Radio. So I mean, I realize in the rest of the United States, that's somehow the liberal progressive thing, but in LA,
and there's no liberal
it's a joke.
media. That to everybody listening out there, there is no such thing as liberal media. There
Okay,
is
so
no
if
liberal
you want
media.
to, yeah, if you want to look at the study on that, you can go to fair.org, Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, fair.org, and they have a study where they said, is there a liberal bias in the media? And they went ahead and did a study. And no, there is no liberal bias.
Nope.
It was something
Nope.
like 90-1 that they have like pro-war people. They never have anti-war people. There is literally no such thing as a liberal bias, verifiably so. So again, it's just that the term liberal bias in the media comes from psychotic, delusional fascists.
Yep, absolutely. I was looking for that. Well, I'm on the website, but I was looking for the poll. I didn't see the poll.
It's not a poll.
Fair.
It's a
Okay,
survey.
okay. Fair
It's a
studies.
study.
Fair
Yeah.
studies here. Let's see. But keep talking. I'm looking.
No, go ahead. And I think Chrissy, at some point, I'm sorry, we kind of cut you off, Chrissy, when we were talking about the gun thing with.
Oh yeah, Chrissy, come on, give us your thoughts.
No, I don't need to go back. That's right.
Did you forget what you were going to say, Chrissy?
No, but I mean, to go back, all I was going to chime in about what y'all was saying is like, look at Kyle Rittenhouse, but that's it. That's all I was going to chime in.
Oh, exactly. Kyle Rittenhouse. Exactly. So that's that's the other piece of evidence. I mean, the okay. And let me make it clear that the white Christian evangelical churches raised what, $500,000 for him. Okay, so let's make it clear what we're talking about here. We are talking about white terrorism. The KKK is very explicitly Protestant evangelical. Let's not forget that they weren't just against blacks and Jews. They also hated fucking Catholics. Okay, so yeah, absolutely. Kyle Rittenhouse is
who actually crossed state lines at the age of 17.
Yeah. With his mom, with his white mom. She bred the terrorists
with the gun.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then the other double standard here is every single time there's a young black man that commits a crime, we say, where was his mother in all this? And yet here we're like, what kind of vicious, monstrous household did you have, Mrs. Rittenhouse? You created a psychotic, delusional monster who thinks the barbarians are at the gate and he's got to defend good white Christian America from all these darkies. You don't produce a vicious, murderous child like that on accident. It takes a lifetime of cultivation. He didn't become that way overnight.
No, and of course, the same ones that blame the victim and pull up their past and said, oh, they had marijuana charges and they had this, they're going to praise him. They praise the Kyle Rittenhouses. They praise them, and or it's always mental health. They always always have mental health issues. When they can't let them slide and they have to be charged, then they pull out the mental health. When it's a situation where, like how Kyle Rittenhouse was able to get off and whatever, they didn't have to go the mental health route. But with the victims, they always have to, oh, well, his past was this and his past was that. What does his past have to do with him marching for Black Lives Matter? Because Black lives do matter and we are the ones being killed. Y'all just proving the point.
And they keep proving the point because, like what Charles was just saying, the subway murderer, they raised money for him for killing a Black person. Then it was even the bike lady, the racist bike lady that was trying to steal the Black kid's bike. They raised $500,000 for her. So they're
raising. She tried to change the narrative too. She tried to say she had the bike first and that. Then her time ran out, and then he tried to take it. She tried to switch the whole narrative around, and then he's like, "No, I got receipts. I had the bike before you even came over here, and I was continuing to have the bike."
But the terrifying message that all this is sending is, we will pay white people to terrorize Black and brown bodies, and we will pay you for it. I mean, it's just too many. It's not even coincidence. It's just too many instances. Kyle Rittenhouse, the racist bike lady, the murderer white guy on the subway. You know, they're raising all this money for these white terrorists to terrorize Black and brown bodies in this country.
But I want to keep bringing this back into perspective of the fact that I don't want to confuse the audience. Like, oh, here's an incident, here's another incident. I want to put it into the framework of the consistency of this through history, the consistency across the society, the knowingness amongst a wide range of white Christian evangelicals. Okay, the fact that 91% of white evangelicals voted for Trump when they had a white evangelical candidate. They just know that the core of their belief system has nothing to do with Jesus, the church, or anything. It's like those great tweets where the Bible written by the greatest American to ever live, Jesus. Right? It's that Jesus it's the white American Jesus who authored the Bible. I mean, it's just it's not at all different than suicide bombers, these Islamic suicide bombers, who verifiably don't know one fact about Islam, not one. In fact, the most important one, they always ask them, what's the difference between Sunni and Shia? Not one of them knew. I don't know. They're like, I know I'm Sunni and I know Shia are from the devil, or vice versa.
So they cherry picked their favorite parts, and then they even misinterpreted that.
Well, the worst sin in Islam is to kill another Muslim. So again, when we identify these people, we have to call them Islamo-fascists because it's about fascism. It's not about Islam. Likewise, when we see these people, we have to see that as Christian terrorists, not as representative of the teachings of Jesus.
Yeah, that they are absolutely not that. So this is a great conversation tonight, a great show. And we're going to close out now because I'm sure there's going to be another, there's like another part to this Second Amendment conversation that Charles and we're going to add. And then Chrissy, thank you for joining us in the conversation. We're going to drag you back again. We're going to drag you back. So if you like our show, please thumbs up. Thumbs up because YouTube has changed their monetization partnership. They've changed, so they've lowered like the subscribers counts and stuff like that, so to make it easier for people to get monetized. Not that I want to get monetized, but I want to get my views and my thumbs up up. And if you would like to make a donation, there's our Cash App here. And if you would like to support us by buying some merch, then we have a merch store here. Just scan the QR code. And we will see you on the next show. Thank you for joining us. Leave your comments, like, share. Thank you.